The blizzard hammered downtown Chicago with merciless fury, turning the streets into a frozen wasteland where only the desperate dared to venture. Through the swirling snow, a figure huddled against a storefront, a young mother clutching a cardboard sign with trembling hands, her children's faces pressed against the glass behind her, hollow eyes reflecting a hunger that cut deeper than the bitter cold. Marcus Chen had seen combat in 3 theaters of war, but nothing prepared him for the sight of this woman's quiet desperation. As a retired Navy SEAL, he'd sworn to protect the innocent, yet here, in his own backyard, innocence was slowly dying in the snow. When she whispered her children's names and begged for just enough to buy them one meal, something inside Marcus snapped. He didn't know that saving this family would drag him into a deadly conspiracy involving human trafficking, corrupt officials, and a past that connected him to this woman in ways he never imagined. The children would eat tonight, but at what cost? And why did this stranger's face seem so hauntingly familiar? Marcus stood frozen for a moment, his breath creating small clouds in the Arctic air as he studied the scene before him. The woman couldn't have been more than 25, her dark hair matted against her scalp, cheeks flushed red from the cold. Her cardboard sign read simply, "Please help. My children haven't eaten in 2 days." Behind the storefront glass, 2 small faces peered out, a boy who couldn't have been older than 6 and a girl maybe 4. Their eyes were too large for their gaunt faces, and Marcus recognized that look. He'd seen it in refugee camps, in bombed-out villages, in places where hope went to die. But this wasn't a war zone. This was Chicago. This was America. "Ma'am," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the howling wind as he approached. The woman's head snapped up, and for a split second he caught something in her expression, not just desperation, but fear. Deep, bone-chilling fear that had nothing to do with the weather. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I just need enough for some food. My babies." Her words trailed off as tears began to freeze on her cheeks. Marcus pulled out his wallet without hesitation, but as he reached for the bills, something made him pause. The way she held herself, despite the obvious desperation, there was a dignity there, a strength that spoke of someone who hadn't always been in this position. Her clothes, though dirty and worn, weren't the typical garments of someone chronically homeless, and there was something else, something nagging at the edges of his memory. "What's your name?" he asked gently, crouching down to her level. "Elena," she said, then quickly added, "Rodriguez." But there was a hesitation, so slight that most people would have missed it. Marcus didn't. "Elena, how long have you been out here?" "Just today," she said, then caught herself. "I mean, it's been hard since my husband—" She stopped, shaking her head as if trying to clear away unwanted thoughts. Marcus handed her $200 bills, watching as her eyes widened in shock. "This should cover food for tonight and tomorrow, but I want to help you get somewhere warm." Elena's hands trembled as she took the money, but she shook her head vigorously. No, we can't. I mean, thank you for this, but we can't go anywhere. We have to stay here. In this storm, you'll freeze to death." "It's not safe," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "He said if we left this corner, if we went anywhere else—" She stopped abruptly, as if realizing she'd said too much. Marcus felt his SEAL instincts kick into high gear. "Elena, who said that? Who's watching you?" Before she could answer, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the curb 20 feet away. Elena's face went white, and she scrambled to her feet, pressing herself against the storefront. "Oh God, she whispered. "They found us again." Marcus stood slowly, his eyes never leaving the vehicle. His hand instinctively moved to where his sidearm would have been during his military days. 2 men in expensive coats stepped out of the SUV, their movements deliberate and predatory. "Mrs. Kozlov," one of them called out, his Russian accent thick despite the wind. "You know better than to accept charity. Mr. Petrov doesn't like it when his property makes unauthorized transactions." Elena, or whoever she really was, began backing away, pulling her children close. "Please," she said to Marcus, her voice breaking. "You have to go. You don't understand what you're getting involved in." But Marcus understood perfectly. He'd seen enough human trafficking operations during his military service to recognize the signs. The fear, the control, the way these men carried themselves, predators who saw people as commodities. As the men approached, Marcus stepped between them and the family, his posture shifting into something altogether more dangerous. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, "I think you're confused. This lady and her children are with me now." The larger of the two men smiled coldly. "I don't think you understand the situation, friend." Marcus smiled back, and anyone who'd served with him would have recognized it as his most dangerous expression. "Actually, I understand it perfectly. The question is, do you?" The warmth of Marcus's apartment enveloped them like a cocoon, but the woman, Elena, she'd whispered, still trembled as she cradled the sleeping infant. Her daughter, maybe 4 years old, pressed against her mother's side, dark eyes wide with a mixture of fear and cautious hope. Marcus moved quietly through his kitchen, the familiar ritual of preparing food grounding him. He'd heated soup, made sandwiches and brewed tea, but his mind churned with questions he didn't yet dare ask. 23 years in the teams had taught him to read people, and Elena's terror ran deeper than simple hunger or homelessness. This was the kind of fear that came from running, from something or someone. "Here." He set a bowl of steaming chicken noodle soup in front of the little girl whose name he'd learned was Sophia. The child looked to her mother, who nodded permission before Sophia began eating with careful, measured bites. Too careful for a starving child. Someone had taught her to be grateful, to not take more than offered. Elena accepted her own bowl with shaking hands, her gratitude evident in every gesture. Between spoonfuls, she spoke in fragmented sentences, her accent carrying traces of Eastern Europe beneath perfect English. "We have been walking for 3 days, she said, glancing repeatedly at the windows, as if expecting shadows to materialize. "I lost our money. They took everything." Marcus noted what she didn't say, how they'd lost the money, who had taken it, why they were walking instead of seeking help from authorities or shelters. In his experience, people avoided official channels for 2 reasons. They were hiding from the law, or the law couldn't protect them. "Where were you headed?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. Elena's hand instinctively moved to her coat pocket, a gesture so quick he almost missed it. "North. We have family in Canada." Another lie, or at least not the complete truth. Her tells were subtle but clear to someone trained to extract information. The slight tightening around her eyes, the way her free hand found Sophia's shoulder, as if anchoring herself to something real. What about the baby's father? The question hit like a physical blow. Elena's face went ashen and her spoon clattered against the bowl. Sophia looked up sharply, her young face suddenly older, more knowing than any 4-year-old should be. He cannot help us." Elena's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Marcus's instincts sharpened. In the teams, they'd rescued enough trafficking victims and abused families to recognize the signs. The way Elena positioned herself between him and her children, the hypervigilance, the reluctance to provide details, all pointed to someone running from domestic violence or something worse. He pulled out his phone to check the weather, and Elena flinched at the movement. When he showed her the screen displaying the forecast, she relaxed marginally. "Storm's supposed to last through tomorrow night," he said. "Roads will be impassable. You're welcome to stay until it clears." Elena's internal struggle played across her features. Safety warred with whatever drove her to keep moving. "We cannot impose." "You're not imposing. I've got space, and honestly," he gestured around the sparse apartment, "I don't get much company." That much was true. Since retiring, Marcus had become something of a hermit. The transition from constant missions to civilian quiet had been jarring. His VA counselor called it adjustment disorder. Marcus called it peacetime blues. While Elena put the baby down for a nap in the guest room, and Sophia curled up with a picture book, Marcus stepped onto his covered porch. The wind had picked up, driving snow horizontal across the landscape. Through the storm, he could barely make out the lights of his nearest neighbor a mile away. His phone buzzed, a text from his former teammate Jake, now working private security in Denver. They'd maintained contact, part of an informal network of retired special operators who kept tabs on each other. "Storm's a beast. You good up there in Hermit Land?" Marcus typed back, "Fine, riding it out." He almost left it at that, then added, "Got some unexpected company. Family stranded in the storm. Good for you. Maybe some normal human interaction will improve your sparkling personality." Marcus smiled despite himself. Jake never missed a chance to needle him about his isolation. But as he looked back through the window at Elena gently stroking Sophia's hair while keeping one ear tuned to the baby monitor, he wondered if normal was the right word. Something was very wrong with this picture, and every instinct he developed through years of high-stakes operations was screaming warnings. Elena wasn't just running from poverty or bad luck. She was running from something that had put professional-level fear into her bones. The question was whether she was an innocent victim needing protection, or if he'd just invited something dangerous into his sanctuary. Either way, Marcus realized with grim certainty that his quiet retirement had just become significantly more complicated. Marcus sat in his truck outside the emergency room, engine running, watching through the glass doors as medical staff wheeled Elena away on a gurney. The children had been taken to pediatrics. Malnourished but stable, the doctor had assured him. He'd given the hospital a credit card and strict instructions that money was no object for their care. The snow had stopped, but the cold bit through his jacket as he finally stepped outside. Something about Elena's story didn't sit right. Not the desperation. He'd seen enough of that to recognize the real thing. But there were details that nagged at him. Her hands, for one. Despite the dirt and cold, he'd noticed calluses in specific patterns, the kind that came from weapons training, not just hard labor. And when she'd collapsed, he'd glimpsed a small scar on her wrist, perfectly straight, deliberate. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in months. "Torres, it's Cross. I need a favor." Danny Torres had been his spotter in Afghanistan, now worked private security with connections throughout the intelligence community. The kind of man who could find information that didn't want to be found. "Marcus? Thought you'd gone full hermit mode up there." "Still am. I need you to run someone. Elena Vasquez, probably mid-30s, 2 kids, Tommy and Sophia. Currently homeless in Millfield. What's this about?" Marcus watched an ambulance pull away, red lights cutting through the grey morning. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. "Just see what you can dig up. Give me 6 hours." The line went dead. Marcus drove home, but instead of his usual routine of coffee and solitude, he found himself pacing. He'd spent 2 years trying to forget the feeling of a mission, the electric tension of knowing something was wrong but not yet understanding what. That feeling was back now, crawling under his skin like an old wound before a storm. By afternoon, he was back at the hospital. The children were in a shared room, looking impossibly small in the white beds. Tommy was awake, staring at a cartoon on the wall-mounted television with the intensity of someone afraid it might disappear. Sophia slept curled around a stuffed bear one of the nurses had given her. "Mr. Cross?" Tommy looked up as Marcus entered. "Is Mama okay?" "She's resting. The doctors are taking good care of her." Marcus pulled a chair next to the bed. "How are you feeling?" "My stomach doesn't hurt anymore." The boy's voice was small. The nurse said, "I can have soup later. Real soup." "That's good." Marcus studied the child's face, looking for resemblance to Elena. Same dark eyes, but something in Tommy's expression reminded him of someone else. Someone he couldn't quite place. His phone buzzed. "Torres, I need to take this," he told Tommy. "I'll be right back." "In the hallway," he answered. "What did you find?" "That's the question, isn't it? What I found is a whole lot of nothing. No Elena Vasquez matching your description in any system I can access. No record of those kids either. Birth certificates, school records, medical history. It's like they materialized out of thin air 6 months ago. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. People don't just appear. No, they don't. But they disappear, and sometimes they get new identities. Torres paused. There's more. I ran facial recognition on the description you gave me. The system flagged a possible match to someone else entirely. Someone who's supposed to be dead. Who? Can't tell you over the phone. Meet me tonight, the Warehouse District, Pier 47, 11 o'clock. The line went dead again. Marcus stood in the hospital corridor, surrounded by the quiet beeping of machines and the soft voices of nurses, and felt the familiar weight of secrets settling over him. Whatever Elena was running from, it was big enough to erase her existence and create a new one. Big enough to leave her and her children starving in the snow rather than risk exposure. He returned to the children's room. Sophia was awake now, sitting up and drinking apple juice through a straw. She smiled when she saw him, the first genuine smile he'd seen from either child. "Thank you," she whispered. Marcus felt something crack inside his chest. These kids, whatever their mother's secrets, were innocent. They'd been hungry and cold and afraid, and now they were safe. That had to matter more than whatever complicated truth he was about to uncover. But as he looked at Tommy again, the nagging familiarity struck him harder. Not just resemblance, recognition. He'd seen this boy's face before, or something very close to it. In a briefing photo maybe, or surveillance footage. The pieces of a puzzle he didn't yet understand were beginning to surface, and Marcus knew from experience that once that process started, there was no going back. Whatever Elena Vasquez was hiding, whatever had brought her to that snowy street corner with her children, he was already too deep to walk away. The hunt had begun, even if he didn't yet know what he was hunting. Marcus pulled his truck into the parking lot of Pine Valley Elementary as the final bell echoed across the schoolyard. Children poured out in colorful winter coats, their breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. He scanned the crowd until he spotted them. Emma clutching a worn backpack, her hand protectively holding Tommy's as they walked slowly toward the street. The boy looked even smaller in daylight, swimming in a jacket that had seen better years. Emma's shoes, Marcus noticed, had tape across one toe where the sole was separating. They moved with the careful deliberation of children who had learned not to run, not to draw attention. He climbed out and approached them carefully, hands visible, movements non-threatening, old habits from extraction missions where frightened civilians needed gentle handling. "Hey there," he called softly. "Emma, right? And Tommy?" Emma's head snapped up, eyes wide with recognition and wariness. She pulled her brother closer. "You're the man from this morning?" "That's right, Marcus." He crouched down to their level, noting how Emma positioned herself slightly in front of Tommy. Protective instincts already hardwired at 8 years old. "I was wondering if you two might be hungry for a snack." Tommy's stomach answered before he could, growling audibly. Emma's cheeks flushed pink from more than just the cold. "We're not supposed to talk to strangers," she whispered, but her eyes kept darting to Tommy's thin frame. "That's very smart. Your mum taught you well." Marcus reached into his jacket slowly, producing his phone. "How about we call her? Ask if it's okay for me to buy you both some hot chocolate and maybe a sandwich?" The hope that flickered across their faces nearly broke something inside his chest. When had he become soft enough that hungry children could crack his armor? But Emma was already shaking her head. "She's at work. We can't bother her at work." "Where does she work?" Emma's mouth clamped shut, those protective instincts kicking in again. But Tommy, younger and hungrier, piped up before his sister could stop him. "The big store with all the food. She counts things in the back." Marcus nodded, filing the information away. "Grocery store, likely inventory or stocking. Evening shift given the timing. Tell you what, how about we get that hot chocolate and I'll make sure your mom knows where you are. Deal?" 20 minutes later, they sat in a corner booth at Rosie's Diner, a local institution that had weathered decades of economic ups and downs. Emma watched Marcus like a hawk while Tommy demolished a grilled cheese sandwich with the focused intensity of a child who wasn't sure when his next meal might come. "This is really good," Tommy mumbled around a mouthful, cheese stretching as he spoke. Don't talk with your mouth full, Emma whispered automatically, but she was making quick work of her own sandwich. Marcus sipped his coffee, observing the practiced way Emma broke her food into small pieces, eating slowly to make it last. How she kept glancing toward the door, calculating exit routes. The way both children ate everything on their plates, then carefully wiped them clean with the last pieces of bread. So, what grade are you in, Emma? Third. Tommy's in kindergarten. She studied him over her hot chocolate. Why are you being nice to us? Direct question. He respected that. Sometimes adults need to help each other out. Your mom's having a tough time right now, because Dad died. The words came out matter-of-fact, but Marcus caught the tremor underneath. I'm sorry to hear that. That must be really hard. Tommy looked up from his empty plate. He was a soldier like you. Mom said he was brave. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. What makes you think I'm a soldier? Emma tilted her head, studying him with eyes too old for her face. You stand different, and you keep looking at all the doors. Mom does that too sometimes. Perceptive kid. Your dad was in the army? Marines, Tommy said proudly. He had a uniform with shiny buttons. The pieces began forming a picture Marcus didn't like. Military widow, 2 kids, working inventory at a grocery store. The math was brutal and predictable. Death benefits that didn't stretch far enough, survivor benefits that barely covered rent, pride that kept her from asking for help until desperation forced her hand. What was your dad's name? David Chen, Emma said quietly. He went to Afghanistan and didn't come back. Marcus pulled out his phone, fingers moving quickly across the screen. A few taps brought up military databases he probably shouldn't still have access to, but old connections died hard in the Special Operations community. Staff Sergeant David Chen, 2 tours in Afghanistan, killed in action 18 months ago during a convoy escort mission, survived by wife Sarah and 2 children. The breath left Marcus's lungs in a rush. 18 months. This family had been struggling for 18 months while he'd been feeling sorry for himself in his comfortable house, nursing old wounds and avoiding human connection. He looked up to find both children watching him, reading something in his expression. What? Emma asked, that protective edge creeping back into her voice. Marcus closed his phone and leaned forward. How would you 2 feel about helping me with something? The warmth of the diner felt surreal after the bitter cold outside. Marcus watched Elena cradle the steaming mug of coffee between her trembling hands, her eyes darting nervously toward the window every few seconds. The fluorescent lights revealed what the darkness had hidden, the sharp angles of severe malnutrition carved into her face, the premature lines of someone who had aged years in mere months. Tell me about your children, Marcus said gently, sliding a plate of eggs and toast across the cracked formica table. Elena's fingers tightened around the mug. Sophia is 8. She loves to draw, even though we have no paper. She makes pictures in the dirt with sticks. Her voice carried the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights. Miguel is 5. He stopped asking about his father 6 months ago. And their father? The question hung in the air like smoke. Elena's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Marcus glimpsed something harder beneath her desperation, a flash of the woman she had been before circumstance stripped everything away. Dead, she said flatly. Car accident, they told me. Very convenient timing. Marcus leaned back, his instincts sharpening. 20 years of combat had taught him to recognize the space between truth and lies, and Elena was navigating that space carefully. Convenient how? She took a shaky sip of coffee, buying time. Roberto was asking too many questions about his construction company's books, about where certain payments were really going. 3 days before he was supposed to meet with federal investigators, his brakes failed on Highway 9. The pieces began forming a familiar pattern in Marcus's mind: corruption, intimidation, silencing. He had seen it play out in foreign countries, but domestic operations followed the same playbook. What kind of construction work? City contracts mostly, public housing projects, infrastructure. Roberto found invoices for materials that were never delivered, subcontractors that didn't exist, millions of dollars disappearing into shell companies. Marcus watched her carefully. And after the accident? Elena's laugh was bitter. Accident benefits were denied. Life insurance claimed suicide, even with no evidence. Roberto's construction company, which was half ours, suddenly had new owners. Papers filed 3 days after his death, backdated to show a sale that never happened. The diner's bell chimed as a customer entered, and Elena flinched, her head snapping toward the door. Just a teenager grabbing coffee, but her reaction told Marcus everything about the fear she lived with daily. "We lost the house within 2 months," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I tried to fight it, hired a lawyer with what little savings we had left. He stopped returning my calls after someone broke into his office and destroyed all his files on our case." Marcus felt the familiar heat building in his chest, the same feeling he got when witnessing injustice that demanded action. "You tried the police?" Detective Carson seemed sympathetic at first, took my statement, promised a thorough investigation. 2 weeks later, he transferred to another precinct. His replacement told me Roberto's case was closed, accidental death, insufficient evidence of foul play. Elena pushed the eggs around her plate, appetite clearly secondary to the relief of finally telling someone who might listen. "We've been living in my car for 4 months now. I've applied for assistance, but there's always another form, another requirement, another delay. The children keep asking when we can go home." Marcus studied her face, noting the stubborn set of her jaw despite the exhaustion. "Why hasn't whoever killed your husband come after you?" "Who says they haven't?" Elena pulled her coat tighter. "My car has been broken into twice, nothing valuable taken, just ransacked. Someone followed me to the shelter last month. I see the same van parked outside wherever we sleep." She met his eyes directly. "They want me scared and desperate, not dead. Dead wives become martyrs, investigations, but a grieving widow slowly falling apart, losing her children to the system because she can't provide for them? That's just another sad story nobody questions." The calculation was cold and effective, Marcus realized. Keep her alive but destroy her credibility through poverty and desperation. By the time anyone might listen to her accusations, she would look like exactly what Elena had appeared to be tonight, a desperate woman whose grief had unhinged her. "What's the name of Roberto's old company?" "Pinnacle Construction, now owned by something called Mountain View Development." Elena's voice hardened. "Funny thing about Mountain View, their registered address is a post office box, and their filed paperwork lists the same 3 names that keep appearing on city council meeting minutes." Marcus felt pieces clicking into place like a weapon being assembled. Municipal corruption, construction contracts, convenient deaths, and a system designed to silence witnesses through systematic destruction rather than violence. It was sophisticated, which meant it was organized and protected. Elena finished her coffee and glanced at the clock. "I should go. The children will worry." But Marcus was already planning. The enemy had made their first mistake. They had left a witness alive. The warehouse sat like a concrete tomb in the industrial district, its windows dark except for a single amber glow on the 3rd floor. Jake crouched behind a rusted shipping container, studying the building through his scope. 2 guards patrolled the perimeter, sloppy, predictable patterns that screamed amateur hour. These weren't military men. They were street thugs playing dress-up with automatic weapons. Earpiece crackled. "Movement on the south side," Marcus whispered from his position across the street. 1 more guard smoking by the loading dock. Jake had called in exactly 1 favor for this operation. Marcus Chen owed him from Kandahar, and debts between SEALs were sacred things. No questions asked, just boots on ground and eyes on target. "Roger that. I'm going dark for insertion." Jake switched off his comm and melted into the shadows. 20 years of covert operations had taught him that silence was more deadly than any weapon. His boots made no sound as he approached the building's blind spot, where rusted fire escapes climbed like skeletal fingers toward the upper floors. The first guard, never saw him coming. Jake's arm snaked around the man's throat, applying pressure to the carotid artery until the body went limp. He lowered the unconscious form behind a dumpster and continued his ascent. Through a grimy window, Jake glimpsed the warehouse interior. Crates stacked in military precision, but not filled with the usual contraband he'd expected. These containers bore medical supply markings, pharmaceutical labels. His jaw tightened. If Rodriguez was trafficking drugs, Elena's children weren't the only victims in this equation. The third floor revealed a different scene entirely. Through the amber-lit windows, Jake watched Elena sitting in a metal chair, her hands zip-tied behind her back. Rodriguez paced before her like a caged predator, his movements sharp with agitation. 2 more men flanked the room's exits. Jake couldn't hear their conversation, but Elena's body language told the story. She sat straight-backed, defiant even in captivity. Whatever Rodriguez wanted from her, she wasn't giving it willingly. Moving with practiced precision, Jake picked the lock on a service door and slipped inside. The warehouse smelled of motor oil and something else, something chemical and wrong that made his combat instincts flare to life. He climbed the interior stairs, each footfall calculated to avoid the building's groaning protests. The voices became clearer as he approached. "You think you can just disappear?" Rodriguez's accent carried the cadence of controlled fury. "You think I wouldn't find you in this frozen wasteland? I told you," Elena's voice was steady despite her circumstances, "I don't have what you're looking for. It died with David. Your husband was careless, Elena. He took something that didn't belong to him, something worth more than your pathetic little family." Jake pressed against the wall outside the room, his hand moving instinctively to the Sig Sauer on his hip. Through a crack in the doorway, he assessed the tactical situation. Rodriguez stood 8 feet from Elena. Guard 1 covered the main entrance. Guard 2 positioned himself near what appeared to be a secondary exit. But it was Elena's next words that stopped Jake cold. "David died protecting those files because he knew what you were planning. How many children in Guatemala died from your contaminated vaccines? How many families destroyed?" The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't about drugs or money. This was about something far worse. Medical trials conducted on vulnerable populations, data that could expose a network of corporate corruption and human experimentation. Rodriguez backhanded Elena across the face, snapping her head to the side. "Your husband was weak. He thought he could play hero, expose our research partnerships. Look where his conscience got him, a bullet in the head and his family begging in the snow." Rage flooded Jake's system, but years of combat discipline kept him focused. Elena's husband hadn't been a simple aid worker, he'd been a whistleblower, murdered for trying to protect innocent people from medical exploitation. "The encryption key, Elena. David hid it somewhere, and you're going to tell me where. Even if I knew, I'd die before helping you murder more children." Rodriguez drew a pistol from his waistband. "That can be arranged, but first, your son and daughter will watch their mother beg for mercy." The tactical assessment was complete. Jake moved. Guard 1 dropped silently as Jake's knife found the gap between his vertebrae. Guard 2 turned at the sound, but caught the thrown blade in his chest before he could raise an alarm. Rodriguez spun toward the commotion, his pistol sweeping the room. Jake was already inside his guard, one hand crushing the man's wrist, the other driving upward into his solar plexus. The pistol clattered across the concrete floor. "Elena Vasquez," Jake said, not taking his eyes off Rodriguez as the man gasped for air. "We need to talk." The warehouse district lay shrouded in pre-dawn darkness when Marcus arrived at the coordinates Victor had provided. He'd spent the night studying the building schematics he'd pulled from city records, memorizing every entrance, exit, and potential choke point. The 3-story brick structure had once housed a textile company, but now served as a front for Kozlov's money laundering operation. Marcus checked his watch. 4:30 a.m. Security would be at its lowest point. Guards likely drowsy from the long night shift. He'd counted on this timing, just as he'd counted on Victor's information being accurate. The Russian had seemed genuinely terrified when he'd spilled everything he knew about Kozlov's operation, including the location where they conducted their most sensitive business. Moving like a shadow between the abandoned buildings, Marcus approached from the north side, where a loading dock provided cover. His tactical gear felt familiar against his body. Knife secured to his thigh, Glock holstered under his arm, flashbang grenades clipped to his vest. It had been 2 years since he'd suited up for a mission, but muscle memory kicked in as if no time had passed. Through night vision goggles, he spotted the first sentry posted near the main entrance. The man leaned against the doorframe, cigarette glowing in the darkness. Amateur. Marcus had eliminated professional soldiers who'd made smaller mistakes. He circled to the rear of the building where Victor had mentioned a service entrance. The lock was old but functional. Marcus made quick work of it with his pick set, slipping inside without triggering any obvious alarms. The interior smelled of machine oil and something else, something metallic that made his jaw tighten. The first floor appeared empty except for scattered office furniture and filing cabinets. Marcus moved systematically through each room, clearing corners and checking for tripwires. Kozlov might run a criminal enterprise, but the man had military training. Underestimating him would be fatal. A stairwell led to the second floor where muffled voices drifted from behind a heavy door. Marcus pressed his ear against the wood, counting at least 3 distinct speakers. One voice carried a familiar accent, Russian, commanding. Kozlov himself, most likely. Marcus tested the door handle. Locked, but not with anything sophisticated. He could breach it in seconds, but first he needed to know what waited on the other side. Through a grimy window overlooking the floor below, he spotted 2 more guards positioned near what appeared to be a makeshift office setup. The smart play would be to wait, gather more intelligence, maybe call in backup. But Marcus thought of Elena's hollow eyes when she described watching her husband die. Some situations demanded immediate action. He descended to the first floor and approached the guards from behind. The first man never saw him coming. Marcus's arms snaked around his throat, applying pressure to the carotid artery. The guard went limp in 8 seconds. His partner turned at the soft sound of the body hitting the floor, but Marcus was already moving. A swift strike to the solar plexus doubled the man over, and another precise blow to the back of his neck dropped him unconscious. With the first floor secured, Marcus returned to the stairwell. The voices above had grown louder, more animated. He caught fragments in Russian and broken English, something about shipments and timetables, but then another voice cut through the conversation, one that made his blood run cold. A woman's voice, speaking in accented English, calm, controlled, almost businesslike. But Marcus recognized the cadence, the particular inflection on certain syllables. He'd heard that voice before, pleading for help in the snow outside his cabin. Elena. Marcus froze on the stairs, his mind racing through possibilities. Had Kozlov captured her? Was she being held against her will? But as he listened more carefully, the context of her words became clear. She wasn't a prisoner. She was negotiating. "The timeline you're proposing is unrealistic," Elena said. "My contacts in Prague need at least 2 weeks to arrange the documentation. These aren't street-level operations we're discussing." Kozlov's laughter rumbled through the door. "Always the professional, Elena. This is why we work so well together. Your husband, God rest his soul, he was good muscle. But you have the mind for this business." Marcus felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Every assumption he'd made, every conclusion he'd drawn, suddenly crumbled. Elena wasn't the victim in this story. She was a player. "The children remain our priority," she continued. "Whatever arrangements we make, their safety comes first. They've been through enough." "Of course," Kozlov replied, "though I still think using them as props in your little performance was perhaps unnecessary. The American seems to have bought your story completely. The American. They were talking about him." Marcus gripped the stair railing as the full scope of his mistake became clear. Elena hadn't been a desperate mother seeking help. She'd been running a con, using him for reasons he was only beginning to understand. Every detail of her story, from the starving children to the dead husband, had been carefully crafted to manipulate his protective instincts. The question now was why. The warehouse felt like stepping into a tomb. Marcus moved through the shadows with practiced silence, every sense heightened as he processed the layout. Rusted machinery cast twisted shadows in the dim light, filtering through grimy windows. The acrid smell of motor oil and decay hung heavy in the air. Elena followed close behind, her breathing controlled but tense. She'd insisted on coming despite his protests, claiming she knew Kozlov's patterns better than anyone. Marcus had reluctantly agreed. Her intel could mean the difference between success and walking into a trap. "Third floor," she whispered, barely audible. "Northeast corner. That's where he conducts business." Marcus nodded, gesturing for her to stay back as he approached the stairwell. The metal steps would creak under their weight, announcing their presence to anyone listening. He tested the first step carefully, finding the point where the metal met the support beam, the strongest and quietest spot. They climbed in agonizing slow motion, pausing at each landing to listen. On the second floor, voices drifted from somewhere ahead. Russian words, clipped and professional. Marcus caught fragments, something about a shipment, timing, money. As they reached the third floor, Elena touched his arm and pointed down a corridor lined with office doors. At the far end, light spilled from beneath a door marked with Cyrillic letters. Two men flanked the entrance, their casual stance betraying the weapons bulging beneath their jackets. Marcus studied the setup. The guards were positioned to watch the main corridor, but they couldn't see the perpendicular hallway that ran behind their position. He'd have to circle around, taking them from behind, while Elena created a distraction. He was about to signal his plan, when Elena suddenly stepped past him into the corridor. "Victor!" she called out in accented English, her voice carrying a note of familiar authority that made Marcus's blood run cold. Both guards snapped to attention, hands moving toward weapons before recognition dawned. The taller one smiled, holstering his gun. "Elena Kozlova," he replied in heavily accented English. "We wondered when you would come home." Marcus pressed himself against the wall, mind racing. Kozlova, not Petrov. The implications crashed over him like an avalanche. Elena walked toward the guards with confident steps, her entire demeanor transformed. Gone was the desperate mother he'd found in the snow. In her place stood someone who belonged in this world of violence and shadows. "Is my dear uncle expecting me?" she asked, stopping just out of arm's reach of the guards. "He is always expecting you," the second guard replied. "The question is whether you come as family or enemy." Elena's laugh held no warmth. "After what he did to my children? What do you think?" The taller guard's smile faded. "Perhaps we should ask him ourselves." He reached for the door handle, but Elena moved faster than Marcus had thought possible. A blade appeared in her hand, when had she drawn it, and found the gap between the man's ribs with surgical precision. The second guard barely had time to register his partner's fall before Marcus emerged from the shadows like a predator. His arm snaked around the man's throat, cutting off any cry for help. A quick twist, and the guard crumpled silently to the floor. Elena stepped over the bodies without a glance, wiping her blade clean. "We need to move quickly. Uncle Victor has excellent hearing." Marcus grabbed her arm, spinning her to face him. "Who the hell are you?" Her eyes met his without flinching. "Elena Kozlova, Victor's niece, former logistics coordinator for his organization, until I tried to leave with information that could destroy him. You've been lying to me from the beginning." "I've been trying to stay alive," she hissed. "My husband found out about my family connections, threatened to expose everything unless I helped him steal from Victor. When Victor discovered the theft, he killed my husband and took my children as insurance for my silence." The door at the end of the hall opened, and an older man emerged. Tall and distinguished, with silver hair and eyes like chips of Arctic ice. He wore an expensive suit that couldn't quite disguise the predator beneath. "My dear Elena," Victor Kozlov said in heavily accented English, spreading his arms as if greeting a beloved relative. "You've brought a friend. How thoughtful. 3 more men filed out behind him, weapons already drawn. Marcus calculated angles and distances, finding no good options. They were exposed in the corridor with no cover. "Uncle Victor," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the odds. "You're looking well. Prison apparently agreed with you." Kozlov's smile never wavered, as did exile, it seems. "Though I hear you've been struggling lately, reduced to begging in the streets like a common vagrant. You took everything from me. I took what belonged to me. You stole from family, Elena. There are consequences for such actions." Marcus tensed, ready to move despite the hopeless tactical situation, but Elena raised her free hand slightly, a signal to wait. "I want my children back," she said. "Of course you do," Kozlov replied. "That's why you're here. The question is, what are you willing to trade for them?" The warehouse smelled of rust and decay, its broken windows letting in shafts of pale morning light that cut through the darkness like accusatory fingers. Marcus crouched behind a stack of rotting pallets, his breathing controlled, eyes tracking the movement of 3 guards patrolling the perimeter of what appeared to be a makeshift holding facility. He'd followed the money trail from Kozlov's apartment straight to this abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of the city. The Russian's phone had revealed more than just financial records. It contained photos, schedules, and most damning of all, a manifest listing names, ages, and destinations. Elena's name wasn't on it, but dozens of others were, including several marked as processed with dates spanning the last 6 months. The sound of a heavy door creaking open drew his attention. 2 men emerged from the main building, their voices carrying in the crisp air as they spoke in rapid Russian. Marcus's understanding of the language was limited, but he caught enough to know they were discussing a shipment leaving that evening. Moving like a shadow, he circled the building's perimeter, mapping entry points and guard rotations. The facility was larger than he'd initially assessed. What looked like a simple warehouse from the front extended deep into the complex, with multiple buildings connected by covered walkways. This wasn't some small-time operation. This was infrastructure built for volume. Through a grimy window, Marcus glimpsed the interior of the main building. His jaw tightened. Rows of makeshift rooms, little more than partitioned cells, lined the space. He could see movement within some of them, shadows of people who shouldn't be there, who had probably been promised better lives in America, only to find themselves trapped in a nightmare. The tactical part of his mind catalogued everything. 12 guards visible, at least 4 more likely inside based on the rotation pattern, multiple exit routes, and civilians in the line of fire. This wasn't a mission he could execute alone, not without significant risk to innocent lives. But as he watched one of the guards casually kick a metal door where someone had been making noise inside, Marcus felt the familiar cold fury settle over him. Some things couldn't wait for backup. He retreated to his vehicle and retrieved his gear bag. The weight of the tactical vest felt foreign after months of civilian life, but his muscle memory kicked in as he checked his weapons and communication equipment. The small digital camera he'd brought would be crucial. Evidence was just as important as rescue in a case like this. 20 minutes later, Marcus approached the facility's rear entrance. The guard stationed there never saw him coming. A sleeper hold applied with surgical precision, and the man crumpled silently to the ground. Marcus zip-tied his hands and feet, then dragged him behind a dumpster. The back door was secured with a simple deadbolt. Clearly, they relied more on isolation and intimidation than sophisticated security measures. Marcus picked the lock in under 30 seconds and slipped inside. The interior was worse than what he'd glimpsed through the window. The smell hit him first, unwashed bodies, fear and despair. Muffled voices came from behind the makeshift walls, some pleading in languages he couldn't identify, others silent with the kind of hopelessness that came from abandoned hope. Moving through the shadows, Marcus began documenting everything with his camera. Each photo was potential evidence that could bring down the entire network. But documentation wasn't enough. As he passed one of the partition doors, he heard sobbing from inside, young, female, terrified. The lock was simple. Marcus had it open in seconds. Inside, he found a girl who couldn't have been more than 16, huddled in the corner of a space barely large enough for a mattress. Her eyes went wide with terror when she saw him, but he held up a calming hand. "American," he whispered. "Police, I'm here to help." She stared at him for a long moment, then began speaking rapidly in what sounded like Romanian or Bulgarian. Marcus didn't understand the words, but the desperation in her voice was universal. He held up his phone, showing her the camera, then pointed to himself and made a gesture indicating he would return. The girl nodded frantically, grabbing his arm. She pointed toward the front of the building and held up both hands, fingers splayed, then 3 more fingers. 13. She was telling him there were 13 others. Marcus's radio crackled softly, his emergency contact checking in. He'd established a protocol before entering. If he didn't report in every 30 minutes, his contact would alert federal authorities. But 30 minutes wouldn't be enough to document everything and ensure the safety of 14 victims. Footsteps echoed from the main corridor. Marcus quickly closed the door and melted back into the shadows as 2 guards walked past, their conversation casual, as if they were discussing the weather rather than overseeing human misery. As they passed, Marcus caught sight of something that made his blood run cold. One of the guards was carrying a manila folder, and clipped to its cover was a photograph. Even in the dim light, he could make out the image clearly enough. It was Elena. The warehouse smelled of rust and desperation. Marcus crouched behind a shipping container, counting silhouettes through the grimy windows. 6 men inside, maybe 7. His breath formed small clouds in the frigid air as he studied their positions, noting the casual way they held their weapons. Amateurs playing soldier. But the man at the center desk was different. Viktor Kozlov moved with the measured precision of someone who'd killed before and would again without hesitation. He was examining photographs spread across the metal surface, occasionally pointing at one and issuing orders in rapid Russian. Marcus's earpiece crackled softly. "Thermal shows 7 hostiles, boss. No sign of additional prisoners." Jake's voice was barely a whisper from his overwatch position 3 blocks away. "Copy that." Marcus adjusted his grip on the suppressed pistol. Through his scope, he could see the photos Victor was studying. Even from this distance, he recognized Elena's face among them. His jaw tightened. The plan was simple. Get in, extract information about who ordered the hit on Elena's family. Get out, clean and quiet. But as Marcus watched Victor pick up Elena's photograph and say something that made his men laugh, the plan began shifting in his mind towards something far less forgiving. He moved like a shadow along the warehouse's perimeter, finding the maintenance entrance he'd identified during reconnaissance. The lock yielded to his picks in under 30 seconds. Inside, the space was a maze of crates and machinery that provided perfect cover. The first sentry never saw him coming. Marcus's arms snaked around the man's throat, applying pressure to the carotid artery. The guard went limp in 8 seconds, unconscious but alive. Marcus zip-tied his hands and feet, then continued deeper into the maze. "Where is woman now?" Victor's accented English carried clearly in the warehouse's acoustic space. "She thinks she can hide from us forever?" "Dimitri's men are watching the homeless camps," another voice replied. "She has nowhere to go." Marcus froze. They were still hunting Elena, still hunting her children. The mission parameters shifted again, this time beyond recognition. He bypassed the second guard entirely, using a parallel route between stacked pallets. The third man was smoking by an open-loading door, stamping his feet against the cold. Marcus waited until the guard turned away, then struck with surgical precision. Another unconscious body to add to the collection. Now he could hear Victor's conversation clearly. The man was on his phone, speaking in rapid Russian before switching back to English. "Yes, I understand timeline, but woman saw too much in Sarajevo. She can identify whole network." Victor paused, listening. "No, elimination must look accidental. Children too. No witnesses, no loose ends." Sarajevo. Marcus's blood turned to ice water. Elena had never mentioned Sarajevo. What had she witnessed there? What network was Victor protecting? His phone buzzed with an encrypted message. "Elena, they found us. Taking kids to emergency safe house. Location Sparrow 7. Marcus knew Sparrow 7. An old subway maintenance tunnel he'd shown her during their escape route planning. Defensible, but only for a limited time. Victor's men would find it eventually. "Jake, priority shift," Marcus whispered into his mic. "We've got civilians in immediate danger. Execute contingency red." "Roger that, boss." Going loud in 60 seconds. Marcus didn't have 60 seconds. Through the gaps in the stacked crates, he could see Victor making another call, this one urgent. Whatever he was saying, it was sending his remaining men into motion. The warehouse lights suddenly cut out, plunging everything into darkness. Jake's work, emergency lighting, kicked in, casting eerie red shadows everywhere. Victor's men shouted to each other, confused and moving in predictable patterns. Marcus moved like death through the red-lit maze. The fourth man went down with a knife between his ribs, a quick thrust to disable, not kill. The fifth took a bullet through the shoulder, dropping his weapon as he screamed. Then it was just Victor and one remaining bodyguard, both pressed back against the office area, weapons drawn but firing at shadows. "You know who I am?" Victor shouted into the darkness. "You know what organization I represent? Killing me changes nothing." Marcus stepped into the light, pistol trained on Victor's center mass. "That's where you're wrong." Victor's eyes widened with recognition, though they'd never met. Michael Petrov, the ghost of Syria. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Michael Petrov was a legend in certain circles, a Russian FSB operative who disappeared 3 years ago after exposing a human trafficking network, a man who'd sacrificed everything to save innocent lives. Marcus saw Elena's face differently now, saw the calculated way she'd approached him, the perfectly crafted story, the desperate mother act that had played on every protective instinct he possessed. Elena Petrov, not a victim, not helpless, a fellow operative who'd been running the longest con of her career, and he'd walked straight into it. The bodyguard moved first, swinging his rifle toward Marcus, but Marcus was already in motion, muscle memory and training taking over even as his world tilted on its axis. The abandoned warehouse felt like stepping into a tomb. Marcus moved through the shadows with practiced silence, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The building had been gutted years ago, leaving behind a skeletal framework of rusted beams and broken concrete, perfect for someone who wanted to disappear. He'd been tracking Kozlov's movements for 3 days, following a trail of corruption that led from the city's social services department to a network of offshore accounts. Elena's case file had been just the tip of the iceberg. Dozens of families had been systematically destroyed, their children processed through a machine designed to break them down and rebuild them as commodities. The sound of footsteps echoed from somewhere deeper in the building. Marcus pressed himself against a support pillar, drawing his sidearm with fluid motion. Through the maze of debris and scattered equipment, he could make out voices speaking in hushed Russian. "The Kozlov operation needs to be accelerated," a voice said. "Too much attention now." Marcus crept closer, using the ambient noise from the nearby highway to mask his movement. Through a gap in the collapsed ceiling, moonlight illuminated a makeshift office area. 3 men stood around a table covered with documents and photographs. He recognized Kozlov immediately, the same predatory-bearing Elena had described, the same calculating eyes that had looked at her children like livestock. "What about the woman?" another voice asked. "She's become a liability." Kozlov's laugh was cold. Elena Volkov ceased to be a problem the moment she walked into that police station. Her credibility is worthless now. A desperate mother with a history of mental instability. Who would believe her? Marcus's jaw clenched. They'd orchestrated Elena's breakdown, driven her to the breaking point where any testimony she might give would be dismissed as the ravings of an unstable woman. It was systematic, methodical, and absolutely ruthless. "The seal is more concerning," the third man said. Marcus didn't recognize the voice, but the accent suggested military background. "He's been asking questions, making inquiries about our financial arrangements." "Thomas Blake is a relic," Kozlov replied, shuffling through the photographs. Marcus saw images of children, dozens of them, including Sophia and Mikhail, a broken soldier playing hero. He has no understanding of the larger picture. Marcus smiled grimly at the underestimation. He'd spent years letting people believe he was just another damaged veteran, haunted by ghosts and struggling with civilian life. It was remarkable how often that assumption worked in his favor. Moving with surgical precision, he began to circle the group. The warehouse's layout offered multiple approach vectors, but he needed them alive. Dead men couldn't testify, couldn't provide the evidence necessary to dismantle the entire network. His phone vibrated silently. A text from Detective Rivera. "Got the warrant. Moving in 20 minutes. Marcus typed back quickly, delay 30, almost in position. The timing would be crucial. Rivera's team would need the evidence he was about to gather, but they also needed the suspects contained. Kozlov and his associates couldn't be allowed to disappear into the wind. "What about the other families?" Kozlov asked, pointing to a list of names. "The Morrison children should be ready for transfer next week." Marcus's blood went cold. They weren't just covering their tracks, they were expanding operations. How many other Elena Volkovs were out there, driven to desperation while these predators profited from their children's suffering? He checked his equipment one final time. Flashbang grenades, zip ties, recording device. Everything needed to end this cleanly. Through his earpiece, he could hear Rivera's team moving into position around the building's perimeter. 30 seconds, Rivera's voice whispered. Marcus began his approach, using the natural acoustic dead zones in the warehouse to mask his movement. The three men were focused on their planning, completely unaware that their carefully constructed world was about to collapse around them. The new facility in Brooklyn should be operational by... Marcus emerged from the shadows like death itself. The first man went down before he could reach for his weapon, a precise strike to the carotid artery, dropping him unconscious. The second managed to draw his gun, but found himself staring down the barrel of Marcus's Sig Sauer. "Hands where I can see them," Marcus commanded, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Kozlov raised his hands slowly, that calculating expression never wavering. "Mr. Blake, I was wondering when we would finally meet face to face. You know who I am. I make it my business to know about people who interfere with my work." Kozlov's smile was reptilian. "You have no idea what you're walking into. Enlighten me. This operation has protection at levels you cannot imagine. Judges, politicians, federal agents. You think you're saving children, but you're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic." Marcus's expression didn't change. "Then I guess we're all going down together." The warehouse doors burst open as Rivera's tactical team flooded in, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights. But Marcus kept his weapon trained on Kozlov, sensing that the real battle was just beginning. The warehouse district at 3 in the morning was a graveyard of industrial dreams, where shadows pooled between rusted shipping containers and broken streetlights flickered like dying stars. Marcus crouched behind a concrete barrier, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air as he studied the target building through night vision binoculars. Kozlov's money laundering operation ran through the abandoned textile factory like a cancer through healthy tissue. For 6 hours, Marcus had watched the patterns, guards rotating every 40 minutes, delivery trucks arriving at irregular intervals, and the constant stream of desperate people entering through the back entrance, people who looked just like Elena had 3 weeks ago. The weight of his sidearm pressed against his ribs, familiar and reassuring. But tonight wasn't about overwhelming force. Tonight was about precision, about cutting the head off the snake without alerting the rest of the nest. Elena's children were finally safe, hidden in a secure location 2 states away, but hundreds of other families remained trapped in Kozlov's web of exploitation. A black sedan pulled up to the main entrance, its engine purring like a satisfied predator. Marcus adjusted his scope as Viktor Kozlov emerged, his expensive coat incongruous against the industrial decay. Even from this distance, Marcus could see the man's arrogant swagger, the casual way he gestured to his bodyguards as if he owned not just the building, but every soul within it. Marcus had spent the last 72 hours learning everything about Victor's operation. The man was methodical, paranoid, and utterly ruthless. He rotated between 5 different locations, never staying in one place longer than necessary. But he had one weakness: his need to personally oversee the weekly collection from his human trafficking network. Tonight was collection night. The factory's loading dock opened with a mechanical groan, spilling yellow light across the cracked asphalt. Marcus counted 8 guards, all armed, all professionals. Through his earpiece he could hear fragments of conversation in Russian and broken English, names, numbers, locations, intelligence that would prove invaluable to the task force building their case. But Marcus wasn't here for the task force. He was here for Elena, for her children, for every family Kozlov had destroyed in his climb to power. Moving like smoke through the maze of abandoned machinery, Marcus approached the building's eastern wall. The ventilation shaft he'd identified during his reconnaissance was exactly where the blueprints indicated, 12 feet up, barely wide enough for a man his size, but leading directly into the factory's main floor. Inside the building, Victor's voice echoed off concrete walls as he berated his lieutenants about falling revenues. Marcus navigated the ductwork by memory and instinct, each movement calculated to avoid detection. Through ventilation grills, he caught glimpses of the operation below, tables covered with cash, ledgers tracking human cargo, and photographs of families, including one that made his blood freeze. Elena's picture was pinned to a bulletin board labeled Priority Recovery. Below it, photos of her children with dollar amounts written in red ink. They hadn't given up. Even now, with Elena in protective custody and her kids in hiding, Kozlov was actively hunting them. Marcus dropped from the ductwork into a storage room filled with shipping crates. Each container was marked with innocuous labels: textiles, machinery parts, agricultural equipment, but the small air holes drilled near the locks told a different story. The bitter taste of rage filled his mouth as he realized what these crates had transported. The main floor was a cavernous space where Victor held court like some medieval king. Tables arranged in a semicircle displayed the week's profits, while a PowerPoint presentation on a laptop showed shipping routes across the eastern seaboard. This wasn't just local exploitation. It was an international network with tentacles reaching into every major port city. Marcus counted 14 people in the room, including Victor. Too many for a frontal assault, even with his skills. But he didn't need to fight them all. He just needed to create enough chaos to accomplish his real objective. The explosive charges he'd planted on the building's electrical transformer triggered exactly on schedule. Emergency lighting kicked in as the main power grid failed, casting everything in hellish red illumination. In the confusion, Marcus moved. The first guard went down silently, a knife between the ribs, before he could shout a warning. The second guard's weapon was in Marcus's hands before the man realized the threat. But instead of shooting, Marcus melted back into the shadows, letting paranoia and darkness do the work for him. Victor's voice cracked as he screamed orders in Russian, his earlier arrogance replaced by animal fear. His men fired at shadows, their muzzle flashes revealing positions while destroying their night vision. Marcus used their panic against them, striking from unexpected angles before vanishing again into the industrial maze. When the shooting stopped and emergency sirens wailed in the distance, only Victor remained standing in the center of the factory floor, spinning in circles with a pistol clutched in his shaking hands. Marcus stepped into the red light, his own weapon trained on the man who had turned human suffering into profit. "Victor Kozlov," he said quietly, "we need to talk." The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town looked exactly like the kind of place Marcus would choose for a final confrontation. Jack approached through the skeletal remains of rusted machinery, his boots crunching on broken glass and debris. The winter wind howled through gaps in the corrugated metal walls, creating an eerie symphony that masked his careful advance. Elena waited in the truck with the children, hidden behind a cluster of storage containers a quarter-mile away. He'd given her explicit instructions. If he wasn't back in 30 minutes, drive straight to the FBI field office and ask for Agent Sarah Chen. No matter what she heard, no matter what happened, she was to protect those kids above all else. The main entrance stood slightly ajar, a deliberate invitation. Jack ignored it, circling to find the loading dock where a broken window provided silent entry. His training kicked in automatically, scan corners, check sightlines, control breathing. The familiar rhythm steadied his nerves as he slipped inside. The cavernous space stretched before him, filled with shadows and the skeletal remains of industrial equipment. Overhead lights flickered sporadically, casting dancing silhouettes that could hide a dozen threats. But Jack's eyes had already adjusted, and he moved with the fluid precision of someone who'd navigated far deadlier terrain. "You came alone," Marcus's voice echoed from somewhere in the maze of machinery ahead. "I'm impressed. Most men would have brought an army." Jack said nothing, using the sound to triangulate position while advancing through the shadows. His Sig Sauer felt comfortable in his grip, but he hoped it wouldn't come to gunfire. Too many variables, too many ways for this to go wrong. "I've been thinking about our conversation," Marcus continued, his voice now coming from a different direction. He was moving, staying mobile, about honor and sacrifice. "You really don't understand what Elena did, do you?" A metallic clang echoed from the far side of the warehouse. Jack froze, listening. Could be Marcus, could be misdirection. He kept moving toward the center of the space, where a raised platform provided elevated cover and better visibility. "She told you about the bombing, I'm sure. Poor innocent victims, tragic accident, but she didn't mention the 3 months of reconnaissance, did she? The careful planning? The way she studied those people's routines?" Jack reached the platform and climbed silently, using the shadows cast by overhead beams for concealment. From this vantage point, he could see most of the warehouse floor. Movement caught his eye, a figure shifting between machines 50 yards away. 12 people died that day, Marcus's voice carried clearly now. 3 of them were children. Elena knew they'd be there. She knew, and she triggered the device anyway. The words hit like physical blows, but Jack forced himself to focus. Whatever Elena had done, whatever she'd been, didn't change the present situation. Those children in the truck were innocent. They deserved protection. "You're wondering if it's true," Marcus called out. He'd stopped moving, standing now beside a large industrial press. "I can see it in your face, that little seed of doubt." Jack had a clear shot, but something held him back. Maybe it was the certainty in Marcus's voice, or maybe it was the memory of Elena's eyes when she'd told her story. Too much pain there for simple lies. "She was 19 years old," Marcus continued, "recruited by my organization when she was 17. We told her she was fighting for freedom, for justice. We told her the bombing would cripple enemy supply lines." Jack shifted position, angling for a better shot while keeping his weapon trained on the figure below. The man seemed strangely relaxed for someone facing down a trained killer. But that wasn't the real target, was it? The real target was destabilizing the region, creating chaos we could exploit. Elena was just another tool, another disposable asset, until she discovered the truth. A new voice cut through the darkness, Elena's voice, raw with emotion. "That's why I ran, why I disappeared." Jack's blood froze. She was supposed to be safe, supposed to be protecting her children. He spun toward the sound and saw her emerging from behind a support pillar, hands visible but trembling. "Elena, get out of here," he said sharply. "I can't," she replied, never taking her eyes off Marcus. "Not until this is finished." Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You see, Jack? Even now she's making choices that put others at risk. Some habits never die." "The children," Jack started. "Are safe," Elena interrupted. "Agent Chen found us. They're in federal custody now." The pieces clicked into place. Elena hadn't disobeyed his instructions. She'd been planning this all along. The question was whether she'd come to confess or to ensure Marcus could never hurt anyone else. Marcus raised his hands slowly and Jack saw the detonator clutched in his right palm. 12 seconds, he said calmly. That's how long we have before this place becomes our tomb. Just enough time for Elena to tell you who she really is. The abandoned textile factory on the outskirts of town stood like a monument to decay, its broken windows staring blindly into the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus crouched behind a rusted shipping container, watching the building through night vision scope. 3 guards patrolled the perimeter, sloppy, predictable patterns that spoke of overconfidence. Elena knelt beside him, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. She'd insisted on coming despite his protests, claiming she knew the building's layout better than anyone. The determination in her eyes reminded him of soldiers he'd served with, people who'd already lost everything and had nothing left to fear. 2 more inside, she whispered, pointing to a second-floor window where cigarette smoke drifted out. Dmitri keeps his office on the 3rd floor, northeast corner. There's a service elevator in the back, but it's loud. Marcus studied her profile in the darkness. 3 hours ago, she'd been a desperate mother begging for help. Now she moved with the calculated precision of someone intimately familiar with violence. The transformation unsettled him more than he cared to admit. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly. She didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Because men like you see the world in absolutes. Good people, bad people, heroes and villains." Her fingers traced the scar along her jaw. "I stopped being a hero the moment I started working for Dmitri. You were protecting your children. I was building bombs." The words hung between them like an accusation. "Not all of them were used on empty buildings, Marcus. Some of those devices, innocent people died because of what I created." A guard rounded the corner, assault rifle slung carelessly across his shoulder. Marcus watched him through the scope, calculating distance and approach angles. "How many? Does it matter? Even 1 is too many." Elena's voice carried the weight of a confession years in the making. "I told myself it was temporary, just until I could get the kids somewhere safe. But Dmitri doesn't let people leave. He made sure I understood that my children's safety depended on my continued cooperation." The guard disappeared around the building's far side. Marcus lowered the scope and turned to face her fully. "That's why you came back to town?" "He called 3 days ago, said he had one final job for me." Elena pulled a small device from her jacket pocket. Metal cylinder, digital timer, wires trailing from both ends. Municipal courthouse. City council meeting tomorrow night. 47 people on the attendance list. Marcus stared at the bomb, recognizing the professional craftsmanship even in the dim light. Military-grade explosive, shaped charge design. Timer mechanism that would be nearly impossible to disarm without the proper codes. This wasn't the work of a desperate amateur. This was the creation of someone with extensive training in demolitions. "Special forces?" he asked. "Army Corps of Engineers. 2 tours in Afghanistan before I met David." She tucked the device back inside her jacket. "I was good at my job, Marcus. Too good. When David died and I had nothing left, those skills became my only currency." A second guard joined the first in the patrol pattern. They moved together now, talking quietly, their vigilance dulled by routine. Marcus counted weapons, assessed cover positions, calculated approach vectors. 5 hostiles, unknown number of civilians inside, 1 primary target on the 3rd floor. "There's something else," Elena continued. "The courthouse job isn't random. 3 of the city council members have been investigating Dmitri's operations. They're close to exposing his human trafficking network." The pieces clicked into place with crystalline clarity. Dmitri wasn't just a local crime boss. He was part of something larger, more sophisticated. The courthouse bombing would eliminate his immediate threats while sending a message to anyone else considering interference with his operations. "He's cleaning house," Marcus said, "and after tomorrow night, he won't need me anymore. Women like me, we're liabilities once we've outlived our usefulness." Marcus checked his watch. 4:30 a.m. They had maybe 2 hours before the building came fully alive with activity. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the contacts until he found the number he needed. "What are you doing?" Elena asked. Calling in backup, he pressed dial and waited for the connection. Tommy? Yeah, I know what time it is. Listen carefully. I need you to contact Agent Sarah Chen at FBI Field Office in Syracuse. Tell her Marcus Kane has intelligence on a domestic terrorism plot scheduled for tomorrow night. Elena grabbed his wrist. Marcus, no. If the FBI gets involved, your children will be safe. He gently removed her hand from his arm. But first, we're going to end this tonight. All of it. The call connected, and Marcus began relaying coordinates and tactical assessments to his former teammate. As he spoke, he watched Elena study the factory building with the calculating gaze of someone planning one final mission. Tomorrow, the truth would come out. Tonight, they would finish what Dmitri started. The warehouse felt like a tomb as Marcus moved through the shadows, every sense heightened to razor sharpness. The scent of rust and decay hung heavy in the air, punctuated by something else, fear. He could smell it, taste it on his tongue like copper pennies. His earpiece crackled with Elena's voice. 3 guards on the perimeter, 2 more at the main entrance. Victor's inside with at least 4 others. Marcus pressed himself against a concrete pillar, watching a guard pace past a grimy window. The man's cigarette glowed like a tiny beacon in the darkness. What about the back exit? Clear, for now. But Marcus... Elena's voice carried a weight that made him pause. There's something else. I intercepted communications. They're not just expecting you, they're counting on it. The words hit him like ice water. Explain. This whole thing bringing us here is not about eliminating witnesses. Victor wants you specifically. There's a bounty, Marcus. Someone put a $5 million price on your head. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. In his peripheral vision he caught movement, another guard making rounds. Any idea who? Still working on it, but the timing isn't coincidental. Someone knew you'd come for us. The guard's footsteps echoed closer. Marcus slipped a knife from his belt, the familiar weight grounding him. 20 years of missions had taught him to compartmentalize, to focus on the immediate threat while processing intelligence. But this felt different, personal. Elena, I need you to take the kids and move to the secondary extraction point. I'm not leaving you. This isn't a debate. If this is a trap, then everyone around me is expendable to them. Get Tommy and Sarah out of here. Silence stretched between them before Elena's voice returned, harder now. 2 minutes, then we move. Don't you dare die in there, Marcus. The guard rounded the corner, and Marcus moved like liquid shadow. One hand covered the man's mouth while the knife found the space between his ribs, quick, silent, final. He lowered the body behind a stack of crates and continued forward. The main floor opened up before him, a vast space broken by support columns and abandoned machinery. Emergency lighting cast everything in sickly yellow hues. He counted 5 figures near the center of the space, gathered around something that made his blood freeze. A chair, empty, but positioned like an exhibition. Welcome, Mr. Chen. Victor's voice echoed from the shadows. Marcus stayed low, using the machinery for cover. I was wondering when you'd show yourself. Oh, but I'm not the one hiding. Victor stepped into the light, flanked by 2 men with assault rifles. You're quite the legend, you know. The ghost of Kandahar. The man who single-handedly dismantled the Kozlov network. Marcus kept moving, circling wide. Ancient history. Not so ancient. Especially when you cost certain people hundreds of millions in lost revenue. Victor gestured to his men, who began spreading out. Did you really think Elena's appearance in your life was coincidence? The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He forced himself to keep breathing, keep moving. You're lying. Am I? A beautiful widow with a tragic story, appearing exactly when you needed purpose. How perfectly she played the grieving mother. Victor's laugh was sharp as broken glass, though to be fair, her children are real, as is the hunger, the desperation. We made sure of that. Marcus's mind raced, connecting pieces he didn't want to fit together. Elena's skill with weapons, her knowledge of tactical procedures, the way she'd known exactly what to say to motivate him. She doesn't know about the bounty, Victor continued, as if reading his thoughts. She thinks she's protecting her children by bringing you to us. Quite touching, really. In his earpiece, Elena's voice was tight with strain. Marcus, we've got problems. Multiple vehicles approaching. We're trapped. Victor smiled. Your partner seems to be discovering the situation herself. Don't worry. We have special plans for her too. Marcus emerged from cover, hands visible but ready. Let them go. Your business is with me. How noble. But you see, Mr. Chen, this isn't just about money anymore. You've become quite the symbol, the righteous warrior, the protector of the innocent. Killing you will send a message to others who might think they can interfere with our operations. The sound of vehicles surrounded the building now, heavy boots on concrete. Marcus counted at least a dozen new arrivals by the noise alone. The truth is, Victor said, raising a pistol, Elena was supposed to deliver you weeks ago, but she got attached, started to believe her own cover story, so we had to arrange this little reunion ourselves. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest, not fear but clarity, the kind that came before the most dangerous moments of his life. Victor? Yes, you made one mistake. And what's that? Marcus smiled, and it was Predator's expression. You assumed I came here to rescue someone. His hand moved faster than thought itself. The warehouse smelled of rust and decay, its broken windows letting in shafts of pale morning light that cut through the darkness like accusatory fingers. Marcus crouched behind a stack of rotting pallets, his breathing controlled, every muscle coiled for action. Through the gaps in the wood, he could see three figures moving in the shadows. Kozlov's remaining enforcers, the ones who had escaped the apartment raid 2 days ago. Elena pressed against the wall beside him, her face pale but determined. She clutched the pistol he'd given her with white knuckles, though they both knew she wouldn't be able to use it when the moment came. Her children were somewhere in this labyrinth of concrete and steel, and that knowledge burned in her eyes brighter than any flame. 2 more on the upper catwalk, Marcus whispered, having spotted the glint of metal in the rafters. They're watching the main floor. Classic Overwatch position. How do we... A child's cry echoed through the warehouse, distant, unmistakable. Elena's entire body went rigid. Anya, she breathed, and Marcus had to grab her arm to keep her from bolting toward the sound. Not yet, he hissed. That's what they want. They're using her voice to draw us into the open. Another cry, weaker this time, and Elena's composure cracked like ice under pressure. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she fought against Marcus's grip. She's hurt. They're hurting my baby. Marcus felt something twist in his chest, a combination of rage and protective instinct that he hadn't experienced since Afghanistan. These weren't enemy combatants or rival operatives. They were predators who used children as bait, and that made them something far worse in his book. He released Elena's arm and checked his rifle one last time. When I give the signal, you move to that shipping container on the left. Stay low, stay quiet. I'll clear a path to where they're holding the kids. Marcus. Her voice stopped him as he prepared to move. What you said yesterday, about not understanding how I could work for these people. She swallowed hard. There are things I never told you, about why they really took my children. He turned back to her, seeing something new in her expression, a kind of resigned honesty that made his stomach drop. What things? The trafficking operation you've been tracking, the one that brought down half of Kozlov's network. I'm the one who gave the FBI the information. I've been feeding them intelligence for 2 years. The words hit him like a physical blow. All this time, he'd been thinking of her as a victim who got in too deep, but she'd been playing a far more dangerous game. You're telling me you're an informant? Not officially. I couldn't watch anymore. Couldn't be part of what they were doing to other families. Her voice dropped to a whisper. But somehow Kozlov found out. Taking Anya and Dmitri wasn't about collecting debts or punishing me for some minor transgression. It was punishment for betraying the organization. Marcus stared at her, his mind racing through the implications. If she was telling the truth, then this entire situation was more complex than he'd realized. Elena wasn't just another desperate mother. She was a woman who had risked everything to bring down monsters from the inside. Another child's voice joined the first, weaker, more frightened. "Dmitri." "We finish this conversation later," Marcus said, his voice hard with renewed purpose. "Right now, those kids need us." He moved before she could respond, flowing through the shadows with practiced silence. The first enforcer never saw him coming. Marcus's knife slid between his ribs with surgical precision, and the man dropped without a sound. The second one managed to turn, but Marcus was already inside his guard, breaking his neck with a sharp twist. The men on the catwalk were harder targets, but Marcus had learned patience in places where impatience meant death. He scaled a support beam with cat-like grace, using the warehouse's own shadows as cover. The first sniper was focused on the main floor, never thinking to watch his six. The second one spun at the sound of his partner's suppressed death rattle, but Marcus's rifle spoke first. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant sound of children's voices, closer now, coming from a makeshift room built into the far corner. Marcus dropped from the catwalk and motioned for Elena to follow. They moved together through the maze of abandoned equipment and debris, every step bringing them closer to the source of those heartbreaking cries. When they reached the door, Marcus could hear Kozlov's voice from inside, calm and conversational, as if he were discussing the weather instead of threatening children. "Tell me, little ones, do you think your mother is coming to save you? Because I have some very bad news about that." Marcus felt Elena tense beside him, ready to charge through the door regardless of the consequences. He put a steadying hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Trust me." Then he kicked in the door. The warehouse district stretched before them like a concrete graveyard, skeletal buildings reaching toward the grey dawn sky. Marcus crouched behind a rusted shipping container, his breath forming small clouds in the bitter air. Elena knelt beside him, her stolen pistol gripped with white knuckles. "Remember what I told you," he whispered, checking his rifle one final time. "Stay behind me. When I give the signal, you take Anna and run for the extraction point." She nodded, but her eyes held the hollow determination he'd seen in too many soldiers who knew they might not survive the day. Through his scope, he could see the massive structure where Volkov held court, a converted airplane hangar surrounded by chain link and razor wire. At least 20 armed guards patrolled the perimeter. The plan was brutal in its simplicity: create chaos, extract Anna, eliminate Volkov. But Marcus knew plans rarely survived first contact with the enemy. His radio crackled softly. "Overwatch in position," came Tommy's voice. His old teammate had arrived 3 hours ago with enough firepower to level a city block. "I count 23 tangos outside. Movement suggests more inside." "Copy that." Marcus studied the patrol patterns he'd memorized over the past 6 hours. The guards moved with military precision, former Spetsnaz most likely. This wouldn't be like taking down street thugs. Elena's hand touched his shoulder. "There," she breathed, pointing toward a second-story window. Through the grimy glass they could make out a small figure sitting in what appeared to be a makeshift cell. Anna. Rage burned cold in Marcus's chest. The girl looked so small, so fragile. For a moment she reminded him of his own daughter, the one he'd failed to save, the one whose death had driven him to the bottle and the edge of madness. Not this time. This time he would not fail. "Tommy, I need a distraction on the south side in 30 seconds. "Roger that." "Sending fireworks your way." Marcus turned to Elena. "When that explosion hits, we move. Stay low, stay quiet. If something happens to me, nothing will happen to you." Her voice carried a fierce certainty. "I won't let it." The explosion lit up the morning like artificial thunder. Guards rushed toward the sound, shouting in Russian. Marcus moved like a ghost, Elena close behind. They reached the fence line as Tommy's second blast sent a plume of smoke into the sky. Wire cutters made quick work of the chain link. They slipped through the gap and pressed against the hangar's corrugated wall. Marcus could hear footsteps inside, voices barking orders. He found a service door and tested the handle. Locked. Small explosive charge solved that problem. The door blew inward with a muffled thump, and Marcus flowed through the opening like liquid death. Two guards turned toward the sound, but his suppressed rifle whispered twice, and they dropped without a cry. The hangar's interior was a maze of crates and machinery. Somewhere in this labyrinth, Volkov waited. But first, Anna. They climbed a metal staircase to the second level, where a corridor lined with doors stretched into shadows. Elena checked each room while Marcus covered her back. Empty, empty, empty. Then Elena gasped. Here. Anna sat huddled on a thin mattress, her dark hair tangled, her eyes wide with terror that transformed into desperate hope when she saw her mother. Elena fumbled with the lock as footsteps echoed from the corridor behind them. Go, Marcus said, positioning himself at the doorway. Get her out. 3 men rounded the corner, assault rifles raised. Marcus dropped the first with a headshot, rolled left as automatic fire chewed chunks from the concrete wall. His return shot sent the other 2 diving for cover. Behind him, Elena had the door open. Anna flew into her arms, sobbing, but their reunion lasted only seconds before more boots thundered up the staircase. The window, Marcus shouted, pointing to the grimy glass overlooking the warehouse floor. Tommy, we need immediate extraction, north side. On my way. Marcus kicked out the window as Elena lifted Anna. The drop was 15 feet onto a pile of cardboard boxes, not ideal but survivable. Elena went first, clutching her daughter, hitting the cardboard with a grunt of pain but rolling clear. As Marcus prepared to follow, a slow clap echoed behind him. Very impressive, Mr. Steele. He turned to find Viktor Volkov standing in the doorway, flanked by 4 heavily armed men. The Russian crime lord looked exactly as Elena had described. Silver hair, cold eyes, and the bearing of a man accustomed to absolute power. You have caused me considerable inconvenience, Volkov continued, his English accented but precise. But I suppose I should thank you. You've delivered them both back to me. Marcus smiled, his finger hovering over the detonator in his left hand. Did I mention I used to work in demolitions? Volkov's eyes widened just as Marcus pressed the button. The charges he'd planted throughout the hangar erupted in sequence, turning the building into a collapsing tomb of fire and twisted metal. The courthouse steps were slick with morning frost as Marcus helped Elena navigate the crowd of reporters. 3 months had passed since the warehouse incident, and today marked the final sentencing hearing for the surviving members of Kozlov's operation. Elena's testimony had been crucial in unraveling the entire network, her courage in facing her tormentors inspiring even the hardened prosecutors. Mrs. Chen, a reporter called out, using the name Elena had legally adopted. How do you feel knowing that your children's future is finally secure? Elena paused, her hand instinctively reaching for Marcus's arm. She had grown stronger over these months, but the weight of everything still showed in her careful movements. I feel grateful, she said quietly. Grateful for the chance to rebuild. Inside the courtroom, Marcus watched as Judge Harrison delivered the sentences. Life without parole for Victor's lieutenant. 25 years for the accountant who had managed the human trafficking finances. The local officials who had turned blind eyes received their own punishments, their corruption finally exposed. But it was the civil settlements that truly mattered. The recovered assets from Kozlov's empire had been substantial, and Elena's lawyer had negotiated aggressively. The money couldn't undo the trauma, but it would ensure her children never faced hunger or uncertainty again. As they left the courthouse, Marcus's phone buzzed. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. The moving truck just arrived, she said when he answered. Anna wants to know if she can paint her new room purple. Marcus smiled, glancing at Elena. They'd decided to pool their resources, buying a house large enough for both families. It wasn't romantic. Their relationship remained carefully platonic, built on mutual respect and shared purpose rather than passion, but it was practical and healing for all of them. Tell her purple is perfect, Marcus replied. We'll be home soon. Home. The word still felt foreign, but increasingly right. He had spent so many years believing that his purpose lay in distant battlefields, that his skills were only valuable in combat zones. But these past months had taught him that protection took many forms, and healing required its own kind of courage. Elena's children had adapted remarkably well. David, now 15, had thrown himself into his studies with fierce determination, as if education was his weapon against ever being vulnerable again. Anna, 12, had discovered a love for soccer and spent her afternoons on the field, her laughter echoing across the grass. Little Mika, only 8, had attached himself to Marcus with unwavering devotion, following him around the house and asking endless questions about everything from cooking to car engines. Uncle Marcus, Mika had started calling him, the title appearing naturally one day and sticking. Marcus had never expected how much those two simple words could mean. The therapy sessions continued for all of them. Group sessions where they learned to communicate their trauma, individual sessions where each person could process their specific pain. Dr. Rodriguez had become not just a therapist but a friend, helping them navigate the complex dynamics of their unconventional family. Sarah had surprised everyone with how readily she embraced the arrangement. Perhaps it was because Elena's presence had lifted some burden from her shoulders, the weight of being Marcus's only connection to normalcy. Or maybe she simply recognized that her father needed this purpose, this chance to be a protector rather than a warrior. As they drove home, Elena spoke quietly. "I've been thinking about the foundation proposal." Marcus nodded. They had discussed starting a non-profit organization to help other trafficking survivors, using Elena's experience and Marcus's resources to create something meaningful from their trauma. The legal settlements provided the seed money, and several former Navy colleagues had already expressed interest in volunteering their time. "I think I'm ready," Elena continued, "to tell my story publicly, to help others who might be trapped like I was." It was a significant step. Elena had been fiercely private about her ordeal, sharing details only when necessary for legal proceedings. Going public would mean exposing herself to scrutiny and judgment, but it could also mean reaching people who desperately needed hope. "Are you sure?" Marcus asked. "No," Elena admitted, "but I'm sure it's the right thing to do." They pulled into their driveway as the sun began setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Through the windows, Marcus could see the children helping Sarah organize boxes, their voices carrying through the glass. David was assembling furniture with methodical precision. Anna was dancing to music only she could hear. Mika was carefully arranging his toy soldiers on a windowsill. It wasn't the life Marcus had planned. It wasn't the peaceful retirement he had imagined after leaving the military. But as he watched Elena smile at the chaotic warmth spilling from their house, he realized it was exactly the life he needed. Some battles ended with victory parades and medals. Others ended with purple paint, soccer practices, and the quiet satisfaction of keeping promises made in snowy parking lots to desperate mothers who refused to give up hope. This was his finest mission yet.